Thank you, Hannah, and thank you for having us. We are absolutely delighted to be here with you, and part of this brilliant set of conversations that I think might just try and scratch below the surface of some issues that we sometimes take for granted. So delighted to be kicking that off today. And for those of you that have heard me, us, my team speak before, might notice that we're talking about some slightly different things today. We're coming at this conversation from a slightly different perspective. And the reasons for that, I think, are going to become clearer as the conversation goes on. First of all, I'm going to introduce to you my phenomenal panel. Some of them have travelled 7 hours to get here, and I can't believe that people are willing to do that. And I'm incredibly grateful that my panellists reflect people who are equally committed and passionate about joining these conversations and finding solutions to these really intractable issues as we all are. So first of all, we've got wonderful Claire Hazelgrove, who is now PPS in Cabinet Office.
Yes. In his role as a Chief Secretary for the Prime Minister.
Yes, which is incredibly exciting. We know Claire because Claire worked with us before she became an MP. She worked with us on the food conversation. I think one of the most pivotal pieces of work that we've ever been able to do, and she's a huge part in helping that be a success. And then to my left, I have the wonderful Josiah Meldrum, who is the founder of Hodmedod's, the bean/pulse company of the universe, an absolute hero. And one of the things that I really love about Josiah is not just that he's brilliant at growing beans and pulses and promoting that movement, but he's got a really, really thoughtful insight into the policy context in which any new, more sustainable versions of farming need to take place. And on my far left, which is, I don't know, who knows, is the most wonderful Sarah Langford, who's probably known to all of you as a writer and journalist, and has written the most beautiful book, Rooted. If you haven't yet read it, I urge you to read it. It is the most, in fact, actually listen to it on Audible, and you get to listen to Sarah read it out, which is just beautiful. My husband is, in fact, in love with Sarah. But
I promise I didn't pay her to say that.
But it's all true. It's all true. And so going the other direction, right on the very, very end, we have Dan Monks, who runs a beautiful, beautiful food project in South Manchester called Unicorn Grocery. It's a workers' co-op, and it's a kind of living embodiment of different ways of organising and different ways of bringing food into communities. I'm really thrilled that you were able. You've come least far, so as I say, well done. But you're going to have some brilliant, brilliant experiences to share with us about the kind of reality of bringing new and sustainable systems to life. And then last but very much not least, we've got Toby Anstruther, who runs Balcasky Estate in Fife. And Toby took me for a walk around it in the summer when I was staying in Scotland. And the thing that really, really inspired me, meeting Toby as well as a lovely walk, was going to see the businesses that he is supporting, he is investing in his own community. There are some really beautiful food and farming and maker businesses. So Toby is an investor who is very literally putting his money where his mouth is in building the infrastructure and the community of place. And he does that in Balcasky, but he also has quite a significant role in London, in South Kensington. So you can see we've got this brilliant panel who have got quite diverse but nonetheless connected perspectives on what it takes to create thriving places, and what we might need more of, what kind of policy frameworks we might need more of to invest in what we're calling for now the real economy, or the everyday economy that really touches people in their lives, that people can feel and see and experience, the material economy that matters to all of us. And I think that's because we've ended up in a place where we hear lots of talk about growth, and that's important, but it feels such an abstracted conversation. It feels such a a kind of disconnected conversation from people's everyday and lived experience. And I'm not sure if it is even cutting through to voters, to citizens. And I want us to find a way of reframing that conversation so that all of us can understand what growing the real economy, what growing a really good economy would look and feel like for all of us in communities around the country. And I want to be able to explore with my colleagues too, and indeed you in the audience, what is it that creates thriving communities? What is it that really helps people in communities to flourish? We hear lots of conversations about the built environment, about housing, about infrastructure, about transport, and they're all important, of course they are. But we hear much less about the kind of relationships that are required in communities for them to flourish, what grows, what builds those relationships, what connects people. And here's the thing, we have found in the work that we've done in the food conversation that one of the things that really connects people, really brings people together across cultures, across backgrounds, across class, across relationships is food. Food and farming. And so we're here also at Labour Party Conference to make a real pitch into this government to say, please make food your sixth mission. Food as a mission could be really transformative across all the other missions, but also as a way to connect citizens around real issues that they care about. So that's what we're going to be doing today, and we're going to be hearing from this glorious panel now, and then let's open it up, let's treat this as the lab that it is and really get into a conversation and a debate together. So we're going to start off in the farming, the production side of things. Let's do that first. Who was it that said? Was it you, Hannah, that said everybody's here because they're all farmers? Hannah said, are there any farmers in the audience? Well, there's probably 4 in the panel. In the audience. Yeah, we know how to get up early, don't we? You've written a beautiful, beautiful book that I think I mentioned once or twice about regenerative farming. And perhaps the bit that I took from it more was people's relationship with that type of farming. Just tell folk in the room, what does all of that mean? How do you understand that whole concept and idea?
Well, I suppose what I learned and what made me write the book, because I should say that I'd written a book about being a barrister, which was my old life, and my literary agent was absolutely convinced that I should write a best-selling, very lucrative crime thriller series, and which would have been a sensible move on many levels. And I had to try and persuade her, which I suppose goes to the heart of this, that the world that I had fallen in love with in farming and what it had taught me was about so much more than food, and was so much more than the mechanics of how you produce it. And it had taught me that really, when you look at most of the problems that we face, whether that's problems of mental and physical health, or loneliness, or community, or how we establish circularity in our systems to put back in more than we take out, so that there isn't extractive growth, you can look at food as a system, as a way of connecting all of them. So I managed to persuade her eventually, as someone who hates leaving London, her, not me, that actually this book was the idea behind regenerative farming, or any farming system that puts back in more than it takes out, is really a secret answer to all sorts of problems. So that was the kind of premise behind it, and that's what I saw on farms. So I went around, I managed my own farm for 7 years and transitioned it from a conventional arable and pasture farm to an organic regenerative one, and looked at as many farms as I could get onto to see all of these people, most of whom didn't have big platforms, didn't have big voices. I was quite deliberate about that. I wanted the people who were just kind of quietly getting on with it to show that this is a solution to a problem that people have found on their own, and saw the most extraordinary entrepreneurial, imaginative, creative ways that people were sort of reaching out their own web, which is what they did within their farming system, But the way it relates, I think, potentially to kind of place building and community building in this context is that for those who don't know who would be able to confidently say that they knew what regenerative farming was? That's not. Well, there's no reason why not, because there's no definition. You know, at the moment, unlike organics, there is no certification or definition. And so I think we can twist ourselves in terms of principles about kind of roots in the ground and bringing in livestock, but ultimately, Essex farmer I know called George Young, who says, ultimately, if at the end of your rotation you've got more of everything, more sterile carbon, more water retention, more insects above ground and below ground, more diversity, then you're farming regeneratively. And the way that people did that was bringing more people on. So if you're integrating livestock, you need someone to look after it. If you're selling locally to ensure that your value is kept within your chain, you're going to form relationships with local millers or brewers. And so from one guy on a tractor in a field, which it frankly usually was, you ended up creating a community around the farming and around the food that meant that the one man in a tractor ended up being a whole series of different micro businesses all interacting with each other, which was place building and community building based around the farm.
Thank you. And you've been doing this for ages, Josiah, with your brilliant business Hobnoddles. Just tell us a bit more about Hobnoddles. Who's heard of Hobnoddles? Who's seen Hobnoddles on the air? Excellent, that's more. Excellent. Just the most brilliant bean company. Tell us a bit more about Hobnoddles. Why did you start Hobnoddles in the first place? Why did you start Hobnoddles in the first place? And just tell us a little bit more about how your kind of business can be part of a regenerative mindset.
Yeah, so I think, thanks Sue. I think kind of building on some of the things that Sarah has said actually. I'm actually an ecologist to start with, I had a degree in ecology, and realised, just as Sarah has described, that food is this thing that connects us, and that if we forget about people in ecosystems, then we forget about the biggest agents for change in those ecological systems. And we face a lot of problems, and it's easy to focus on the problems, but there is also a lot of positive change that we can engage in ourselves. And I was working for a small regional NGO called East Anglia Food Link, and we were looking at whether a city the size of Norwich, which is our regional city, whether it could feed itself. And if it did so, how might that change land use, how might diets change as a consequence of that? And we made what might seem like a really blindingly obvious discovery, which is that beans, pulses, peas, lentils are a massive part of the answer, because they're fixing nitrogen from the atmosphere, they're drawing carbon into the soil, they're reducing the requirement for synthetic nitrogen. They're really, really good for us, they're delicious. And starting from that point and realising that not only were they not being grown, but they weren't being eaten, we realised we needed to sort of establish a business that would help us to find a route to market. And I think at that point that we created Hobnoddle, I became what is much maligned in the food system, which is I became a middleman. And I think that the role of the middleman, or middlewoman, but sadly it is mostly middlemen, is really, really misunderstood, and that we have actually a really important facilitating and enabling role. It doesn't need to be extractive, it can be about connecting. It doesn't need to be transactional, it can be relational. And we can use that approach to really rethink about how the economy of food works and how that can feed back and connect those farmers that Sarah met researching her book and allowing them to find a route to market that enables them to do more of that work, which is so incredibly positive.
I love that. That's so important, because the story of the current UK food system is essentially an extractive one. Opaque, often entirely invisible actors in the middle of the system, extracting value from farmers, extracting value from the environment, extracting value from our own health, and profiting, extracting that value from the UK and locating it in the Cayman Islands or the States. And yet, we do need intermediaries. We do need, we're clearly not all going to be able to grow our own food and get our own food onto our plates. So the nature of the business that does that for us in a really productive way is absolutely critical. What kind of conditions would you need if you were giving your top three to Emma Reynolds right now, or even to Peter Kyle. What conditions do businesses like yours need to enable you to flourish in the face of an ecosystem that's actually designed to push you out of it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's even designed to push us out of it. It's sort of designed to not even acknowledge that we exist in the first place. And so we exist in a space where the commodity market dominates. We're working with combinable crops that are harvested at the end of the year and are dry and are storable. And that they are traded globally, and they are traded by 4 very, very big global businesses that operate out of Chicago. And so we're kind of up against that. I think the sorts of things that really help us in a UK context is support for farmers. So things that allow farmers to network, things that allow farmers to exchange knowledge between each other, things that allow farmers to feel supported and encouraged in the change processes that they're undertaking. And there are lots of mechanisms. SFI was actually very positive in that sense. And then I think there are sort of fairly understandable things the challenges that any small business faces, and the barriers to entry that all small businesses face. Really straightforward things like working capital, and the sort of enabling factors around infrastructure, like building physical infrastructure, and the challenges that we face around planning permission and finding locations in rural areas where we want to operate. And then finally, I suppose the third thing is really where do the people that want to work in that new system live? And how do we pay them? And I think rural housing is really critical part of that.
And that's a brilliant segue into a conversation that says and affirms food systems touch pretty much every government department, and action is needed in every government department for a food system to thrive. Claire, let me come to you. Before the election, and in fact, a really inspiring piece of work was produced by Rachel Williams back in 2018 about the everyday economy, and it was a really, really encouraging document, a real recognition of what people need in their everyday lives to flourish and prosper. But there's a kind of, for right or wrong, there's now a perception that growth is focused on tech companies, on the big companies, on the big building developers. And that has its own risks. So how do you suggest that we focus on those parts of the economy that everyday folk like us experience?
Yeah, great question, and I think we'll hear more about that today from the Chancellor in her speech as well. So thanks for having me. First of all, it's good to be back with you. As Stu alluded to, I was working with the team just before the election was called, so it's nice to be able to come back and talk about this with a slightly different hat on these days. But look, I don't think these things are in conflict at all. I think it's completely right to be focusing on both types of the economy and the way you frame it there, because if we're not growing the economy, and if we're not creating these conditions for growth, which means more jobs across our communities, across the country, then we won't be getting the resources, we won't be getting the money in, frankly, to be able to then invest in those things as well. So if we're not growing, we can't put the money into public services, we can't put it into other places too. So for us, it's about doing both things. We've got to get that car really motoring when it comes to growth, not for growth's sake, you're completely right. And I do think there's something about narrative and make sure we cut through in a way that people can relate to, but it's growth so that we can improve living standards and make sure that everybody feels better off. Like, that's a huge goal of this government. It's really not just for its sake, but I think you are right. It's about how we talk about it sometimes, but it is about living standards. It's about making sure that whether it's children having their opportunities to thrive, making sure we break down barriers to opportunity wherever we find them, and that's what drives me in politics. I know it does the Chancellor as well. But what I'd say is, if you look at some examples, look at our 3 major trade deals in recent months alone, look at those with India, look at them with the EU, look at them with the US, that really does impact the everyday economy too, because what that's done, take the US trade deal, that protected hundreds of thousands of British jobs in trades like automation and so automotive companies, in our aerospace companies, in steel, and that's really important because you have people who are at work, but that really impacts them in their everyday lives in terms of the everyday economy. So it's making sure that the growth that we're driving for does genuinely impact and help boost people wherever they're found as well. And I think some of the impact that we've been able to achieve already through our labour values-led decisions are really important to highlight too, and they do really drive and speak to the everyday economy. So by actually turbocharging growth and putting money into our public services, look at what we're doing already around the NHS. We've invested over £26 billion already into the NHS, and we've seen great results already. There's so much more to do. It's only been obviously just over a year. It's only getting done in a year. But we've seen 5 million extra NHS appointments being introduced in comparison with earlier before the election, before Labour took office as well. You're seeing things that impact people's everyday lives through food-related choices as well that this government is making. So things like free breakfast clubs have been piloted and are being rolled out across the country in every primary school. So every child will get a good nutritious meal in their stomach to be ready to start the day. And that's a Labour values-driven decision that is about the everyday economy, as is the fact that, from a different perspective, but childcare, so just this month there are now 30 hours available of government-funded childcare for every child from 9 months up to they start primary school and then benefit from those preschool meals and things like that. But I think the real benefit of that too is it's breaking down barriers to opportunity, particularly for parents, particularly for women, to be able to get back out to work if they want to be doing that, to make choices. And that really is about the everyday economy and cutting costs. And those, even just those 30 hours of government-funded childcare, that could potentially save, just in isolation, that one policy could save up to £7,500 per child per year. That's phenomenally impactful in terms of the everyday economy. And things that we're making other decisions like free school meals and expanding them to every child from any family that receives universal credit could hopefully drive to actually seeing 100,000 children be lifted out of poverty. So these are Labour values-driven decisions that are absolutely with the everyday economy at their heart. But we have to grow the economy to have the money to be able to fund these things, because the money doesn't come from nowhere, and we've got to be able to do that. And for us, it's about growing in a sustainable way. And for me, that means two things. It means growing in a way that our economy is no longer sort of up and down in the ways that we saw over recent years. But it's also about making sure that we are doing that with sustainability at its heart as well. And so it's not about an extractive economy, it's about moving to that everyday and more sustainable and circular economy. In terms of what I was a PPS previously at DEFRA and then also at the Treasury. And I know from those roles as well as what I'm doing now, that real focus on the circular economy is really real. And we'll see so much more of that now. Emma Earls driving that, picking that mantle from Steve Reed. And it's great that he's over now at NHCLG, because then you've got that tie-up between the environmental piece, the nature piece, and the placemaking piece, which I know is something that you're very, in a great way, talking about and expanding more on today.
Thank you. I mean, that was an excellent list. You could persuade your colleagues to rattle off those lists as effectively as you did just there. But I think just want to check in with you, I suppose, about how are you making sure you hear from the broadest range of voices who all want to talk to you about what it is that they need in their businesses? Because I confess I'm very, very often conflicted in my work with DEFRA and with other departments when I see the work that we do with our citizens who express really clearly what it is that they want from the food system, to see it, quite candidly, undermined by some of the really, really good players who are incredibly well resourced, who seem to have ready access to ministers and to policy leaders. So how are you making sure that what you hear from people who want to speak to you is a balanced message, and a message that reflects what citizens are saying, not just the interests of big businesses?
Yeah, that's so important as well. And every government department will have their own strategy and approach for this too, but I think it's why the work that you do as externally is so important, because government doesn't have the same capacity in so many ways and the same specificity, and the civil service are absolutely brilliant, but they're not experts in deliberation, to put it mildly. And so having external audiences be able to do that and to provide that evidence is really valuable, so please keep doing what you're doing as well. But it's not to say that it's not important, because certainly as you touch on with business, when we were in opposition, let alone now in government, that breadth and depth of business engagement from micro to up to SME, up to to larger is really real and continues. So today, for example, at the Party Conference, a big focus is it's our business day.
Yeah.
And so businesses of all shapes and sizes here, and I think that's really important. It's also important, I think, for individual MPs to be leading on that in our communities and reporting in what people are saying across the country. I see a big part of my job as being, as you'll not be surprised, a genuine representative, an ambassador from the people I serve and have the privilege of doing so into government and saying, this is what people are saying. So I've held roundtables with businesses of all sizes, and there's such value in that, not just in terms of what I learn, but in terms of what they learn from one another, and that ecosystem being stronger in my community means that we can collectively make place-based cases for funding, for investment, for change. We'll probably talk about this in a minute a bit more, but we were successful off the back of that yesterday. So there's been, you might have seen announcements around the New Towns unit, and I've been making a place-based case, which has been a different way for my constituency of doing this. It's a number of different towns and villages outside the city of Bristol in South Gloucestershire, so it's not like one place. And so I've been saying we need to have our own narrative because we keep going overlooked. And so we're championing this, and as a result, we will now be getting investment, and it is about placemaking. It's not just about built environment, but it's about actually how can we make this place thrive as we build more homes, how can we make sure we've got the GP surgeries, that we've got the green spaces that we need, and that's really important. And so I think it's making sure that joining up with businesses of all shapes and sizes, we are individually, as well as collectively then as a broader government, listening, hearing those voices and acting. But that's a responsibility for all of us who are representatives to take that on, as well as government writ large.
Thank you, thank you. So Dan, I'm going to come to you next. You're rooted in your community, running union grocery, running a co-op there. My very first job at university in Bristol was running a socialist feminist bookshop co-op in St Paul's. Boy, I learnt a lot about how not to run a co-op. And essentially it ran on the free labour of students who just were very happy to get 30% off the books in the day when there wasn't an internet. So I have a scars on my back from running alternative business models, and yet I'm still absolutely committed to them principles. So you're doing that in Manchester. Tell us a bit more about Unicorn Grocery and how it's working.
Well, it's a supermarket in many respects. We sell whole food ingredients for cooking. We like to think of it as staples that you need to make a meal. We definitely don't position ourselves as kind of luxury or our pricing is very affordable and accessible. But yeah, the co-op sort of foundations really underpins the difference, I think, between buying from us and a supermarket, in that we put ourselves, the workers, and our customers' needs above shareholders, of which we don't have any. And yeah, we look to suppliers like Hopper Dodds, who we were one of your first, I believe.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah, so we're going back years, and just looking at how we can maintain the money within the UK, within our local community. We talk about the sort of local accumulator and how that sort of reinvests, but we have many kind of modes of redistribution. So we have a profit share, we give 5% of our wage bill annually to a solidarity fund, which is really important that it's linked to wages and not to our profit, because obviously the amount that we pay ourselves is to us the indication of how well the business is doing. So every time we take a pay increase, we're able to increase the amount of money that we give away. But yeah, it's just really quite a simple concept to me. It's the sort of food that I want to eat at the sort of prices I'd like to pay for it, in an environment that's nice to be in.
And tell us what that means to your community. How do they feel about having you in there?
I think we have an incredibly loyal, committed group of customers and suppliers that would really rather work with somebody like us than a big nameless supermarket. Certainly from suppliers and any growers or people that have experience of growing will know this, that we pay our invoices within a few days, sometimes on the day of receipt of the goods, which is very atypical, I think, of the and obviously growing is such a speculative, risky game anyway, so if you're not being paid for the goods that you've produced on time, it has a kind of knock-on effect. But yeah, we provide really good benefits, lots of childcare, great, we have sabbatical leave, there's And we do also split a profit share if we make our amount. So it's a really nice life that it supports. But crucially, no one person can become rich from it. And I think that that is something that's really quite different to the norm that we see in a lot of business.
Same question that I directed to Josiah. You're running an alternative business model and aiming to make it thrive in your community. But what are the kind of policy conditions that you would need to see shift or develop or change that would make life a bit easier for you to flourish? Not perhaps feel.
Well, there are several, but we talk about the equity penalty because the way that we distribute our profits completely equally amongst ourselves means that as individuals we actually pay higher taxes than like an employee ownership trust, for example, or if it were dividends that were split not equally, you end up paying less tax. So that seems regressive, I would say, and sort of unfair that we're still relatively low earners, I think, in the grand scheme of, certainly in the context of today, I imagine. And just, I think the thing is, because Unicorn will be 30 next year, we are, we make a great living and we're constantly reinvesting in the business. So we're often held up as this shiny, brilliant example, and that's great, we are. But rather than being sort of wheeled out as this example, I think, meaningful sort of structural support to help other groups set up in this way would actually be far more impactful. Just recognising that, we don't externalise costs, that we actually do kind of create this great community wealth and benefit everyone that comes into contact with us, that should be acknowledged and rewarded and be given a kind of leg up to establish. That would be my advice.
Toby, quite different to Manchester. Have you been investing in your community in Fife, at Bow House, but the other maker businesses too? So tell us what motivated you to do that in the first place, and what do you learn from that experience?
As you can tell from my broad Scots accent, I was actually born in London. So the reason that's relevant is because I came to Fife, if you like, and I come to Fife as an outsider. And in many cases, we get used to thinking about, to understanding the rules and the barriers to the places where we live. And that stops us doing things. We think, I'd never work here. And then you get shining examples like Unicorn, and you think, oh, maybe that would work. So coming in as an outsider, I think is quite important, because you think, why not? Like, if Unicorn works there, why wouldn't it work here? And so a lot of what we do in Fife, I farm. We have an organic hope regenerative, we've got known for 50 years farm there. We supply Josiah, maybe that means we supply Unicorn, who knows? But we also have been developing small business units, and we also run, I guess, the biggest farmers market in Scotland there as a sort of, so it's all about trying to smooth the way into people doing the thing they really want to do, because really everybody wants to contribute, and the thing that stops them contributing is they don't have the money, they don't have the resources, everyone says it will never work, they don't believe in themselves, all of those sorts of things. So a lot of what we're doing at Falcaski is trying to take away some of those barriers. We can't take away them all, but the things that we can do, we try and take away. So we now host 30-odd businesses. They're almost all small businesses, but most people are employed in the country by small and medium-sized businesses. And a lot of those businesses don't want to grow. They want to stay at that size. They're founder-led businesses, often expert businesses. We've got a business that Nike came and sought out when they wanted to develop the fly-knit shoe, because this woman is a real expert in knitting. She's about to be on Channel 4.
Magnificent.
She's magnificent. But that isn't just a sort of fluffy granny knitting. That is really understanding the technicalities of how to make knitting work for industrial purposes as well. But she doesn't want to be a multinational. She doesn't want to employ hundreds of people because it's a real hassle running a big business, but she wants to run a small business and have an easier life running a small business. So we produce space for her, and we also set up, in a way, small clusters of people because it's much easier to be able to go next door and say, I've got a problem with this, how do you solve it? So those sorts of small clusterings are really, really helpful for that.
There were a couple of things that really struck me in my visit. The first was, meeting her and her partner and other traders in the other parts, who really had a sense of passion and agency about what they were doing. They were really excited and enthusiastic and knowledgeable and really engaged in their work. It was a real joy talking to them. The other thing that struck me was how beautiful it was. You'd invested in the quality of the place. It was an attractive place to live and work. Do you think we pay enough attention to those two things? How important it is to the human spirit to feel that we have agency in our lives, and that we need to live in lovely places and real, vibrant, beautiful communities?
I mean, I think agency is really important. Maybe it's a sort of grand word now, but that being that sense that we have some control over how we live and on what the choices we make is really important. And I think, in a way, it comes back to food, because if you can cook with raw ingredients, you have a choice as to what you make and how you make it, and you have a system that allows you to use leftovers and live through the week in that way. And I think quality of life is critical, because it doesn't need to be expensive. Freedom from litter on the streets or clean air or things, they don't have to be expensive, they should be normal. And yet they absolutely change the sense of the quality of life. And I think also, maybe it's a good thing that we've all become more productive or more efficient, but it's taken all the slack out of life and out of these businesses, and that produces sort of constant stress that comes through. That's your business, my business, any business. So having just leaving a little bit of slack. We've got a guy who makes most beautiful guitars. He sells them internationally all over the world. But there is not a chance that you will find him or the people he employs in that workshop when there's good surf up on the beach. Because they make their choice to be able to say, you know what, we've worked really hard, let's go and have a break. And then they'll be in there on a Sunday working whatever hours they want. And so to have that choice is absolutely about quality of life.
I have a son who's living his life like that. Tree surgeon 3 days, 4 days a week, surfer and climber on the weekends. And I think probably my generation would worry a bit about that. Is that serious enough? And yet, for him, having that choice, being able to do what he loves in work and play, is everything to him. That's absolutely everything to him.
But our generation thinks about that as being something that we'll do when we retire.
Yes.
And like
dead.
Yeah. Makes no sense to do it all the way through.
Absolutely. So this is kind of getting us into that conversation. Well, what does it actually take to create community? Is it about ever more consumption of ever more crappy stuff that ends up in landfill or waste, or on our bodies as waste because we've eaten too much of it? Or is there some other conditions of community that actually really do enable us to flourish, connection and our relationship with our natural world? I think one of the things that I loved about the way about the people that you spoke to in Rooted was the connection with where people come from and with their communities. But the other thing I really loved about it is that it appealed to everyone. People who were reading Rooted were not coming just from rural communities. It was connecting to everyone. It was a great seller. You were on all the programs for a little while, and that's because what you were talking about was connecting with all of us. So say a little bit more about what you found when you were writing that.
Well, I suppose I wanted to make it really clear that when I talked about being rooted, I didn't mean that you had to connect somewhere that you were born. that you could do that anywhere. Because I managed a farm in Suffolk, and I wasn't from Suffolk. I grew up in a farming community, but in Hampshire, on the other side of the country. And so I wanted to kind of absolutely expel the fallacy that you can only be connected in the place that you were originally born. You can put down your roots anywhere. And I guess the best way I've got of describing this, bear with me, is planting hedges. So now, when I look at a hedge, I basically see a line of orphan trees, because when you plant a hedge, you get saplings from usually somewhere completely different from where you're going to plant them, and they will come with a different microbial, what's the best way of putting it, sort of pocket around their roots. And you're asking them basically to form connections with a completely different soil pH. And they have to do that because that's how they're going to get their nutrients, that's how they're going to connect with other trees. And in one of our hedges, I planted some oaks, baby oaks, that had been planted by jays in the field next door. So we dug them up, put them in a new hedge, and within a year, they were 6 feet taller. And the reason was they had developed already, they had kind of pre-packaged themselves with the microbial connections for that area. So they were able to put out roots, the mother oak was able to send them extra nutrients and so on. And they survived it because they had managed to form connections. And so that was a lesson basically that you can put in any different circumstance. If you're able to put out your web of connections and form connections with what you need to thrive, you will thrive. And how can you be expected to do that if you don't have what I was doing with the baby orphan trees, is putting them somewhere completely foreign to their root system and expecting them just to get on with it, which is why you've got like a 25% mortality rate for new hedges that will die off. And so when I hear about, and that basically, the heart of that is systems, how we get our systems right. So I'm always a little weary, no shade, but a little weary about hearing sums of money. We're going to chuck 26 million in here, and this money in here, this money in here. And in my head, what I see, weirdly, is a sort of leaky boat with all the money coming straight out of it and ending up in the same pockets that have extracted that money in the first place, not going to actually where it's intended to, because it's been put into a system which is extractive. So you can pick any sum, doesn't really matter. Until you get the system with the connections that make, like those hedges did, make sure that the connection is there to get it exactly where it needs to be in its circularity, what's the point in putting it in the first place? So that's what I kind of learned from the places that have really thrived. It's a bit like getting all the tech that you need in a farm to do your soil measuring, your drones, your weather monitor, but your soil is shot. What's the point? It's the icing without the cake.
I mean, that could not be a more beautiful metaphor for what it takes to create social community. You tried. Very well done. You said it just at the start. People can find their place, their community, wherever they are.
Yeah.
And as a counterpoint to the toxic and dangerous stuff that we're hearing in many of our rural communities at the moment, that's a message that I think we have to shout really, really clearly.
Yeah, and it's also when you, like everything, it's easy to do stuff behind an avatar when you're anonymous, but when you actually go and talk to people, I mean, I went and talked to people at the farmer protests yesterday who had wrapped Alsatians and Union Jacks and were doing posters for farmers alongside digital ID and alongside carbon conspiracies, and it was all mixed up into one sort of tornado of discontent. But when you get in there and start talking to people, which I did, Cumbrian upland farmer and some bee farmer, they were tapped into exactly that. They were discontent about basically the sort of top-down feeling that they hadn't been listened to or heard, rather than the technicalities of what they were upset about. And of course, like any village, like anyone who's ever lived in a village, when there's a them and an us, it's really easy to make it anonymous. and you go and talk to someone about whether it's immigration or other kind of problems, they go, well, they, obviously the guy who, the family who live here, I mean, that doesn't apply to them, because they know them on a personal level. So that is even more reason to be able to form these systems of connection, so that they're not impersonal, so there isn't a them and us, so there isn't a separation.
I think that's so important. It's one of the many reasons that I rage when I see how reform has weaponised that. Actually, it's a natural human response to be wary of the other, to be anxious about the other. Are we over time? Sorry. And being wary of the other is natural. We are evolved to think, people rushing over the hill are they going to kill us or are they going to marry us, as my daughter used to say. But we can be better than that, and we can be better at dealing with those quite tribal emotions and work differently with our neighbours in our community. So brilliant, thank you for that. Dan, just coming across to you, because it's you're in the middle of the city, so we're talking about the rural connections, rural relationships. You're in the middle of the city. Do you find it easier for people to make human connections in city life, but harder to make connections with maybe their natural world, the natural environment, with the natural systems that sustain us, or do you think those sorts of issues are not as separate as we might think?
I think food and the act of eating is the connection that most people have to, soil and the land each day, and it's an opportunity every time somebody does eat to kind of remember that, I guess. But no, in Manchester I feel very well connected to a lot. I mean, we have lots of farms and suppliers that we've incubated as a shop ourselves, and we've got several growing sites. There's a group called Manchester Urban Diggers who run lots of market gardens. Their whole emphasis is on the kind of act of sharing a meal together, and I think, most people will be living in cities whenever it is. So, idealising sort of rural life. I actually do myself live in the countryside now and love it. It's beautiful, but I think there's a lot still to be gained from that, and I think food is just a really immediate and brilliant way to encourage it.
And I think that's another really, really good example of how this kind of populist idea that there's a divide between rural and urban, which isn't real when you unpack it and you talk.
Yeah, I mean there is a really frightening sort of backlash happening in a lot of growing communities. We've been funding some work around organicism and fascism and kind of the links, and there's lots of groups peddling misinformation, using the kind of connection to the land as a kind of way in. So there is definitely a sinister side to it as well. But there's just so little understanding with most people of sort of how precious food is and how finite a resource, and what a miracle it is to be able to get it onto your plate.
I'm getting the pressure from the front, so I'm going to go to some questions and I'm going to encourage you to be in charge of answering them. So who's got a question? One at the back, right there.
Thank you. Alfie Saban, the Obesity Health Alliance. We constantly in public health will have this problem of health harming industries and public health interests being used against each other, and the sense that in my line of food, but also with alcohol companies, tobacco companies, etc., it is the impact of public health regulations on jobs, on economic growth, etc., that's always used to push back against interventions. We've seen it around the 10-year plan with regulations on alcohol advertising being dropped in large part due to pressure from the Department of Business and Trade. What can actually shift the dial to stop this zero-sum game that short-term economic boosts from health-harming industries are prioritised over the longer-term economic gains that we would see from a healthier workforce, more productive people, less health related, welfare spending, all of those things that we now have quite well established.
Claire, I'm going to come to you.
I thought you might. No, at all. Thanks for that, Alfie. And look, I think there's a lot more to that as well, because a lot of those regulations you talked about there around the advertising, around sort of junk food and so on, they are coming in from the 5th of January with a voluntary scheme from next week. And I think that's really positive, because lessons will be learned from a voluntary scheme so we can get it right, because it is about getting things right for the long term, and that's why we committed to this ahead of the election, because it does matter. The evidence is there. This government doesn't doubt that. We're an evidence-driven and led government, and long may that last. In comparison with what you're alluding to elsewhere, on the populist side of things, whether that's on the right or indeed the left, because we've got to be looking at evidence. And so I think that's good. That's coming in January, and as I say, voluntarily as well from October. We're also doing a bunch of other things as well that speak to this, and were affirmed in our 10-year plan just recently as well. And we've also got a whole child health action plan as well, which is really important, I think, too, to make sure that we're tackling issues that are facing the youngest members of our society, so they get the best chance in life too. So we've been investing already in, and it's now launched, a supervised toothbrushing scheme in the most deprived areas of our country as well. We're reviewing the soft drinks levy as well to see if it's being as effective as possible, with a view to making further changes if we need to be able to do that as well. I talked about things like the free school meals that's happening as well. There's an awful lot that really is about how do we look at health, and how do we look at where that can link into, to Sue's point at the start, how can we actually weave that into a lot of things that we're doing across different government departments. So it's not just a case of, right, there's just health-based initiatives and those need to sit in one department, but actually that role of business, the role of education, so where people are and how we can meet them. We're setting up, bringing back a version of Sure Start, right, with our Best Start family hubs, and so having a one-stop shop where there'll be lots more advice and support for families as well. I think that's really important. So there's a lot done already. There's so much more to do. But I think it's good that we are, to your question earlier actually, Sue, as well, we are listening to different businesses and different voices and different stakeholders, as opposed to just deciding from nice offices in Westminster, well, we've decided this is our timeline and we're just going to do it. We've got to get it right, otherwise it won't stick and it won't work. It won't have those health outcomes that we're absolutely driving at and seeking to make sure happen. So I think going about it in that way is right, and we've got these timelines and it will happen.
So I'm getting one question. Angela, go on.
Angela Francis from WWF. Thank you for the beautifully curated conversation you've had here. It's very heartening, and I'm going to take that Hedges metaphor away with me. Beautiful. My question, I come from an economics background, and my question is set in the way that you created this conversation, Sue, which is, I think, how can we look differently at growth? And to use the metaphor you used, Claire, about getting the motor running. I think the conversation is here not how fast the car's going, but what direction are we going in, and how can we give people hope that we're going in a different direction than we've been going into now. So in that vein, and in the spirit of the kind of conversation that's here around what's the character of growth, what kind of communities we're creating, how do you think that sustainability and circularity is running through the DNA of government? Because we see great stuff on clean energy, but we don't see other things in these other areas of our communities where they're affected by ambitions for growth, which have got different characters. And I would say to the point that Toby made, productivity isn't. We're not improving productivity. Actually, sometimes we lose things in focusing on trying to just have narrow growth. We lose some of the innovation and creativity that could come from really embracing that. So I'd love to hear how that can happen in a more full way.
Perfect question, and also because we're running out of time, I'm going to make that the question that invites all the panelists to respond to that. So if we are getting real about the kind of growth that enables the human spirit to flourish and our communities to flourish, what would that look like? And what do we need this government to pay attention to, and to tell our communities that we're paying attention to for all of that to happen? So I'm going to start with you, Dan.
Well, besides the point that I made earlier about conditions and support for worker co-ops or enterprises that focus a bit more on the community, I think an area that we really are sort of championing at the moment is looking at public procurement and food across hospitals, universities, and it's just really frustrating for a lot of people that it's really hard to kind of get a way in there, and that seems like if we're looking at trying to improve diets and increase, you know, the percentage of land that we are farming organically, that would be a great place to start.
And if all of you are learning about placemaking in Scotland and in England, what are you learning about what creates residential communities? What do you want this government to focus on?
I mean, I think I completely echo the public procurement side, but as long as it also allows lots of autonomy locally, because food systems, you know, what we really want is 1,000 farmers through, don't we? We want lots and lots of small enterprises to be able to help. And so we need somehow to cross over from a central decision into something that allows small businesses to operate and be part of something that's stable, so that there's a sense in which they can invest because they know that they will have a market, they will be working to do something. And I think that ability to have some faith in the future, which is so much around governed by the regulatory context, is really, really important. So some sort of stability in the regulatory context would make life a lot easier for small businesses, because we don't have public affairs departments, we don't have regulation departments, we set up businesses doing things that we really love. And then we have to learn about marketing, or learn about everything else that was also on there. But the fear of these extra things, and regulation is a big part of it, and allowing localities to make their choices that then benefit their own communities is really important.
Thank you. We'll come to you last. Just pick up on that point about how distant it sometimes feels, the kind of conversations that we might hear if we're listening to Radio 4 about the investment that's coming in from Palantir and others, but our lived experience every day, our real lives, as Toby just described. Just pick that up a bit more. What does it take to make our everyday lives more prosperous and flourishing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to say something completely not answering your question.
But I was a politician.
As a starting point. I think the thing that I've really noticed, I'm really interested in, is a theme around language and metaphor, the metaphors we use. And you used a beautiful ecological metaphor about a hedgerow, and then there was a metaphor about motors and engines. And I think we need to move away from industrial metaphors to describe the economy and the way that our lives exist, and start to think more about ecological metaphors, because I think those ecological metaphors will shape the way we think about the world and will allow us to engage more readily with what it is that is so fundamental to our existence, which is everything around us. And I think, we do this in our business. We don't talk about chains, supply chains, and things like slavery. We don't want to be in chains. We want to be in networks. We want to have this ready, fast communication happening. And I think for the team who work for us, their lives, the food sector, the food industry, whatever you want to call it, is low paid. It's hard work, and there are many things, particularly rural, that make those people's lives more difficult, which is public transport, which is the infrastructure that goes around that. But we in our business can bring joy to their work by enriching it, making connection with the farmers. Two farmers that work, they don't knew this, two of the farmers that supplies are on the panel are one of our main customers. That's what I mean. And that's what a relational system looks like.
That's what beauty looks like. Thank you. Sarah.
Well, because we've got very little time left, I'm also going to just, I suppose, say that I wonder if placing too much weight on politics sets it up to fail, because we're in a short-term election cycle, and it's very hard to get long-term thinking, which is what we need into a short-term election cycle, so maybe we need to do it ourselves. And that one of the interesting campaigns that I've been aware of recently, I think it's Climate Earth that's doing, is trying to redefine the legal definition of shareholder duty, so that it's not next term's profits, but it's whether your business is going to be in business in 25 years' time. And given how many businesses, as the Descriptor report said, rely on natural resources, that would require shareholders to invest in natural resources, which by its very nature means that it would be a circular business model, because you have to reinvest in what the structures of what you're extracting from. So, but I think
thank you. Final word for you, Claire. So how do conversations like this help you in your conversations with your boss about what we would like him to pay more attention to on behalf of all this?
It's always really helpful to hear from different perspectives. It truly is just why I enjoy these conversations and getting out there. It's one of my favourite parts of my job, actually, is just knocking on doors and listening to people. It's why I hold monthly coffee mornings and just listen to people. My advice is just listen to people and go out with businesses and charities and brilliant community organisations who drive so much of this change already, and listen to them, because that's where so much magic is happening already, and it's how can we help accelerate that. And because even good campaigns like that, regulatory change involves politics, I'm sorry. So I think that's why it's good to make sure you've got good people who have the right values in politics, and to make sure that we are, you know, continuing to listen and so on. But to your broader question around what's needed, and you know, there's so much there absolutely around the procurement side of it and what that looks like in public services. That is something the government is looking at. So how can we make sure that that is something that is supporting small businesses and also the good kind of food that should be happening in places like hospitals? That should be a no-brainer. So we're looking at that for sure. But more broadly, I think it's about, and we've touched on this throughout the entirety of the panel, but it's about placemaking. And it's about communities that can flourish and can thrive. My background, I think it's so interesting when you are elected. One of my colleagues put it really well yesterday, actually, another MP. You become an institution, but actually I'm still the same person I was on July 3rd. I just truly am. And my background is in community organising. It's in places, it's in people, it's in deliberative conversations, it's in empowerment, and it's in skill building and all of those good things. And that's something that I seek to bring to my work, the approaches I take in doing that locally, but also nationally as well. And I think the types of policy that speak to that well around the placemaking, like hopefully you've seen as well some other announcements this week around Pride in Place, money that's going into our most deprived communities around the country. And we're really deepening and doubling down on devolution as a government, and I am really proud of that. I think that's the right thing to do. Again, we cannot decide what's right for different and distinct communities, which are all individually unique. From nice offices in Westminster, that's completely the way to get it wrong. And instead, you have to be out there. You have to have representatives who know what's going on in their communities, and for decisions to be made with communities. And what I particularly like about the Pride in Place money to again support some of the most deprived communities in the country is that decisions around how that will be spent will be made locally by communities. And so it will be local priorities driven by local leaders, but also just individuals who live in that place. And I think that's a brilliant way to do politics differently. And I hope that it can help build up and rebuild and rekindle that trust that has been so lost in politics in recent years, to show that we are different, we are doing things differently. There is a reason to step away and not be, not be led down the path of populism and decline and disruption and division, because we do need a more hopeful society and country. And through things like this, and people in this room and others getting involved and staying involved in things like that when they are in their communities, that is a good example of how we can do it, where you see different parts of society, different parts of the economy working together to help the people thrive.
Thank you. And my big pitch now into Stevie, because I'm going to be stalking him from one department to the next, will be to centre food and farming in Pride in Place work. It's not mentioned in the guidance, and yet, as we all know here in this room, it is the one thing that connects all of us. Thank you to my brilliant panel. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Josiah. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Claire. Thank you for coming. It wasn't such a big conversation because I had too many things to hear on the panel. But I'm really grateful that you turned out, and I'm going to be here. My team's going to be here for the next little while, next few days, and we're really, really happy to have more conversations with anybody who wants to chat with us. So thank you, Phoebe. Thank you.